Microphones are on, guys.
Great nephew's wedding.
Okay.
So he was, he was born and raised rural southern Illinois, Indiana.
Where else? Near Nashville?
No. Close to the Illinois-Indiana state line.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, it's 5:30. Going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Any public comment? Seeing none, go ahead and call the roll. Barron?
Here.
Malone Marshall called, absent. Cobbs, absent. Lewis?
Here.
Lenore Noble, absent. Tolly?
Here.
And myself. We do have a quorum. Sent out minutes yesterday electronically, and also you should have a paper copy in front of you. If you've had a chance, I'd entertain a motion to accept the minutes. Okay.
Second.
Motion by Lewis, second by Barron.
Barron, yeah.
Okay. Now, we got okay, under old business, we continue to leave the enforcement of drinking on public property just on for updates. I defer to Alderman Barron. Any noticeable changes? I know the last couple times we talked about, people, staying in buildings after the business close, and, maybe we could reach out to them and make sure they do a sweep of their own so they don't get any surprises with people left in the buildings. But also behind the Majestic, I guess there were some people behind the dumpsters and some lighting. But outside of that, any updates?
No, I know that some of the people who had been complaining have put in place some of those self-enforcement mechanisms. I mean, they're trying to take care of it themselves. I haven't heard any real complaints in the last month or so.
Okay. Anybody else on that topic? If not, we'll continue to leave that on for updates. Next, we have in our old business was a synthetic drug ordinance. And last meeting, we went ahead and set that aside because at the state level, there was some legislation that should have taken care of, all of this. And to my knowledge, it hasn't been moving forward, so it's kind of stalled at the moment. It's the belief that, we had conversations on this, that due to the greater good, I think, moving ahead with the ordinance would be in the best interest of everybody in the city. So Ms. Landwehr from legal, she, put some things together, so I guess I'll turn it over to her where we're at currently with it. But I believe time's kind of the essence, on this. And other communities are looking to follow, so.
Okay, so the ordinance you have in front of you is a compilation of a couple other ordinances that we have looked at, and also with my meeting with Jim Schreiner again, after he spoke with this committee earlier when he was here with the coroner. I spoke with him again, and he added some substances that basically he knows are being made and used now. So we amended that to add some additional substances. But other than that, it's pretty similar to the first ordinance that you were shown, which probably, came from another municipality. And then as far as the penalty, we've given it both a penalty that is monetary for sale, and then a second, which is basically double. And then it also allows the mayor to declare, to basically revoke a license under it upon the second offense. And that's being done basically under the business license law. He is allowed to do that. And then in here, I put the process for revocation of license, and then the appeal rights if you aren't happy with the decision. So that would make this a complete ordinance in and of itself, so that we're not referring to a whole lot of other sections to try to comply with it. So we looked at putting it into nuisance and different things like that, but essentially this is simply it'd be under the business license law or ordinance, and then it's a new article under that license, that law. And then we would just follow this for any substance that's found or sold that fits the definitions. Now, that's going to take probably a drug analysis to know, but that, that must be what everyone is doing. So that's basically the ordinance that's written. And as far as I can tell, with the help of Jim Schreiner, it's as state-of-the-art as it can be right now. We've been told that it changes a lot, that the drug formulations change a lot. But this would at least put something in place to put people on notice that this is not going to be tolerated. And these substances are off limits.
And we're not the first community doing this. I mean, there's numerous online. I mean, Lockport, Batavia, Orland Park, many others. So I believe we're doing the right thing in this direction.
And this incorporates the idea of, it tries to get ahead of whatever's coming next by saying anything that's similar to a previous one that is mentioned here? Is that
Right, and of course, using the language, including but not limited to. I think, the definitions are pretty broad in the sense that they try to encompass anything that fits this novel or, synthetic or psychoactive. A lot of, under novel synthetic drug, a lot of those deltas, those were additions to the original ordinances that we were working from, specifically language that Jim Schreiner gave us. But, novel semi-synthetic drug is kind of a new thing too. Again, I suppose there could be some enforcement issues here with, first of all, testing it and then making sure it fits in one of these definitions. But I don't know that we can get any more specific than this, given the nature of what we're dealing with.
I mean, if something new comes out and obviously hits the market, I mean, an amendment,
We can
to
always
that.
amend it if we
yeah.
are aware of it, yes.
So, where are we at with it currently? I mean, is it ready to?
It's ready to go if no one has any changes. Even if someone has some changes, it could be ready to go for next week. That it's on the agenda in the event it gets passed. But, I mean, it will be on the agenda. But, it was discussed this morning, the potential of putting this on the agenda if there's no major change to anything, I think it could go. I mean, I think you probably should look through the penalties and the revocation of license process and make sure that that's what you want to go with, that we're not only fining them, but we're also potentially shutting down the business, which is, it's a pretty big thing to shut down someone's business, but my understanding is that most of the places that are selling this kind of thing are smoke shops. So you're not shutting, for the most part, you're probably not shutting down an entire gas station because they sold an illegal drug, because they're not doing this right now, as far as we can tell. One question I had is, what if someone sold this on the street? Well, they get a fine, but it's not really being done either that they're aware of. It's more just the shops selling these substances at this point.
feel free, anybody, any questions or concerns?
So once this is passed, how long do the businesses have to, what process, we notify them to stop the sale of it?
Well, it basically would go into effect right away. We can delay that, or we can, choose a 30-day enforcement process where they get a letter first. If you want to make it effective in 30 days, we could, but, I guess the problem's getting pretty serious.
No, I was just asking, what
Yeah.
Right.
were we doing?
Well, I mean, I don't think we'd go out the next day and, start
Right.
Right,
hitting
right.
people before they have that this is published but, most of the ordinances do go into effect immediately unless we put a clause in there that they don't.
I guess where I'm looking at this, licensing's coming up here, May, I believe it is?
You mean, oh.
Yeah,
you mean
business
the new-
licenses, so, I mean, we're right on the edge of that, so, right now would be the ideal time, because if this, for whatever reason, somebody's, selling this and this is all the revenue from that particular business, they're not gonna, not gonna be penalized for not renewing their business license after May then, they know about it, they're aware of it. So,
Well, I would be in favor of giving them some form of notice that
Right.
this has been passed. It's not necessarily imminent today. but
right,
30 days from now, we will be looking into that, and it falls right into the time frame.
right, and that would still be for, licensing, so I would think,
That's what I'm saying, I thought that's what the plan, I just want to know what were we doing to notify them, let them know to take it off?
conversation. I mean, 30 days, 30-day notice, adequate,
I would think it should be. Can we identify who's selling it? What places have a license that are selling this stuff?
Do we know that already?
Not specifically, but anything that calls itself a smoke shop, cigarettes aren't really what they carry.
Right.
I think you see the signs, the
So-
sign, I mean, I just coming here, I seen the signs,
So what do we have,
My word.
7 how many smoke shops do we have? I know we were trying to limit that also, but, so basically at this point, it's being sold at smoke shops. That's where people know to get it, know to look for it.
Yeah. Some of these are available in gas stations.
Well,
are
that
they
was,
not?
the question was, are gas stations doing it? Some of the feedback was probably not.
Okay.
But, I have heard that it's available, but you don't see the signs for the same kind of things. I mean, I don't know, I don't frequent, purchasing things at gas stations, but Kratom, I don't think I've seen signs for it.
Yeah.
But down here on the smoke
was.
shop, different places, you'll see the signs, which have
Right.
actually been taken down since I think it started to become kind of a controversial issue. So, that's really where we expect it, that's where we think it's coming from, and that's where the dangerous stuff is coming from right now. Doesn't mean it couldn't happen at a gas station. So then, you think about, are you closing down a gas station because they're selling something like this? Well, I mean, they shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
So, and the penalty is permanently removing the business license. So, that's kind of serious if you want to do that. This is fashioned kind of after the liquor license laws, which allow a hearing. The mayor, as liquor commissioner, can terminate a liquor license, revoke it, can suspend it, can give a short-term suspension. But to me, that's not really sufficient here. If this is what you're doing, is you're doing business for the purpose of selling this, then we really don't have a reason to keep that going and just suspend it and let you do it again in 30 days.
We do need
But that, but that's up to how, what you think about what the penalty for this should be. My feeling is we want it off the streets completely because it's dangerous and it's
Right.
hurting children. That was kind of the idea of, pushing this through.
Are you speaking of a penalty other than what you've included in this document?
No, the penalty included in this document is that the mayor, because under the business license, the mayor can close down businesses.
Right,
What, the language that is used.
2164.
yeah.
Yeah, and the language that is used is that it has to be deemed a menace to the health, safety, or welfare of the public, which is specifically what this is. It's a menace to the health and safety of the public. So so under penalty, we are declaring that anyone selling this is creating a menace. So that language is in there so that there's no question about whether the mayor can invoke that.
Right.
And then he says, okay, we're going to shut this one down for 7 days if he wants to. And in the meantime, we set up a hearing, we have a hearing, we go through due process. It's the same type of thing we use with the liquor licenses.
Right.
We go through the due process, and he determines whether there's enough evidence to revoke a business license, and that's revoked. Now, like I said, you can revoke and suspend and do different things, but somehow suspension, when that is what your business is, doesn't seem adequate, but maybe you think it is. And maybe we want, to lessen that, but that is, it's a very strong law that then has appeal rights if they don't think it's correct. With the liquor license, if they don't agree with what the mayor did, the liquor commissioner, in that case, they go back to the state liquor commission and have a hearing.
Yeah.
We don't have something like that for.
Not right now, all right. If there's any sense that comes out of Springfield, maybe they'll step up and finally do this, but,
We are thinking within a year that this will either happen or not happen at all, which means it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So if it happens, then this is just a stopgap. If it doesn't happen, it's something we probably need to keep on our books.
So the revocation of the business license, it is a mandatory, it's mandatory upon the second violation.
Right, and we can make that may. It's may in one of the paragraphs, but it's mandatory on the second. So it's actually, I put it in as may after the first and mandatory after the second. Doesn't have to be mandatory, but, I mean, what would be the discretionary reason not to do it, I guess is what you need to think about. Like,
Right.
why would one person get a pass and not another?
Right.
What about time duration? I mean, if it happens once and then it happens 5 years later.
Yeah, I mean, that's a consideration, but I didn't put a time duration in here because I really didn't know what anyone wanted.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we didn't discuss any penalties or fines, so, but obviously, there has to be, I mean, if the fine is such that you're making $5,000 a week and the fine's $500, you're just going to keep doing it,
Right.
Unless there's a penalty for
beyond.
subsequent offenses
Yeah.
that, nobody wants to shut anybody's business down. I mean, that's just, but I think having the bones in there and the ability to do it for subsequent violations, I think it has to be in there, but.
if you want to make it shall versus, may versus shall, that's, that would take care of that issue of being worried about it being mandatory for someone who's not frequently violating this. But if you're keeping it on hand,
Right.
that's the problem. I mean, this only makes it illegal to sell it because we don't have a criminal penalty for these under the state. So, you know, they're not illegal substances. We're just making them unsaleable in our city. So, you know, if shall makes you uncomfortable, you know, we can change it. But I just, thinking that through, I'm just, you know, sometimes shall doesn't leave discretion in a good way, sometimes shall doesn't leave discretion in a bad way. So,
But may leaves the door open.
right.
I prefer shall.
The only discretionary piece in my mind is just, if there's an extended period of time between the first offense and the second offense, it could be different ownership, it could be, I don't know, there's certain factors that I don't know if shutting down a business
Right.
based upon an offense that occurred in, you know, 20 years ago
Right,
is worthwhile, but if it shall, then they have to.
right. That's,
It's sticky.
But if it
Yeah.
wouldn't, I mean, would a different owner pay, you know, wouldn't that be starting over with a different owner?
probably not if you don't change the business name. If you change, if it's the same location, different business, you know, that's different. I mean, if you want to put a time frame in there, and we can do that, I just don't know what that should be.
I mean, I feel comfortable with a time frame as long as we leave shall. I mean, because I get what you're saying, but,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of
but
any
when
other
we just
reason.
leave it open, then that's where we get the issue of, well, why does this person get a break when this
Right.
person doesn't? And, you know, we don't want to have that argument.
I mean, 12 months, I think that,
And that's as reasonable as any, I would.
Yeah, because like you said, 5 years, why you still have it on in stock if it's illegal?
You just didn't get caught, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, doing it out, you know, under the table.
and then, I mean, would you be okay with so shall with 2 offenses within 12 months,
okay.
Okay.
Put that in there.
may after that, or not even have the may?
Well, if you have 2 offenses within a year, you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, one, okay, obviously, you know, maybe, I think the businesses need to be identified and at least notified of this ordinance, but, you know, but if you have 2 in 1 year, I would think that,
Or
No.
maybe it's 24 months. I mean,
Yeah.
2 and 24 months is shall.
Yeah. I mean, I do agree. I think that, you know, they do need to be aware so that they can train their staff and all this, because there could be some oops that happened. Someone wasn't there, wasn't paying attention, didn't know, whatever the case may be. So to make sure that they are aware and the dire consequences of this if it happens.
Yeah.
So if they care about their business,
just like any ordinance, I mean, you know, we're here, the mayor's here, we may not be here, you know, in a few years. So the intent, you know, the intent is not to really shut a business down, the intent is to stop this particular portion from being sold, you know, out of that business to kids, you know?
Right.
So, and hopefully the state will come in and, you know, make it a moot point, but, so,
yeah.
where are we at? I'd like to see it, you know, I'd like to see this go, so, is it 2 and 24 months, so 1 per year?
Yeah, that
I'd
sounds
say-
sexy.
I'd say 2 and 24 months, or even 2 and 36 months. I mean, I'm okay with that being, that length of time being pretty strong. But I wouldn't want it on the first.
Right.
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 No, and I think that, I think we all agree on that, you know?
24, 36, that seems appropriate to me.
I think I'd lean towards 24 myself.
I'm good with
I
20.
understand the 36, but
Right. 24. Okay. So,
and that keeps the word shall in there. And I don't know if we have to explain it to the public, but we're assuming that that's a rolling 24 months, not a, calendar 24 months necessarily.
Touche.
Okay. Anything else on the penalties that sticks out? I mean, it's a second offense to be punishable by a fine of $1,000, so I mean, there's some teeth to it.
I have a curious question as to whether any of these items are actually sold in our dispensary?
Well, I would certainly hope not.
Well,
They're not.
yeah, I know.
They're not legal to be sold. I mean, they're, you know what?
Because they could be an admixture of something that's,
Yeah,
Older.
but I think I thought those were pretty highly regulated in terms of what.
I would assume so as well, but,
Yeah, I can't answer that question.
yeah, yeah. It's just a curious question, so, but something to keep in the forefront of your mind.
Well, it is a good, a good point. I mean, if you're able to go out to the dispensary and buy it, what's the difference between, going down to the local market or gas station? So that's kind of a big deal,
Yeah. But I would also hope that a dispensary highly
Yeah.
regulated would stay away from something that we have deemed not legal to
Isn't it
sell.
Cannabis only?
There's cannabis and
The paraphernalia?
other admixtures within them, other combinations of, it's not strictly THC products coming out of those dispensaries.
But with that being said, the dispensary, you have to be of age, correct?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, in theory, everyone's carded before.
Right. Well, I'm just saying, the real intent is to prevent, somebody that's, 17 years old just going in there and buying the stuff.
Right, in a smoke shop or whatever,
Yeah, I mean, the
right.
market for this is people who can't, kids who can't buy in a dispensary because of the regulations, being able to do this, and, even in theory, I guess the coroner told us that coming in from, say, Indiana, to buy it here because they can.
Right.
So I don't think these substances are sold, that are named here are sold in the dispensary. I couldn't guarantee that, but it does seem it's more or less cannabis derived, and they're not altered. They're not supposed to be synthetic.
Right,
Yeah, they're not.
right.
So, but, we can ask some questions about that. This would apply to the dispensary too, if we found out they were doing that,
Yeah, yeah.
They don't have to be 21 to go into a smoke shop?
Well, yeah, but who's right, I mean, who's there watching?
Right, no, I was just asking, I didn't know, because I
Yeah.
forgot.
I think you're supposed to be, because,
I know they sell other stuff that's
Well, yeah.
not like, tobacco and all that, but.
We'll defer to our city planner over here.
Right. Like they sell air fresheners in there, so that's
There's
a,
a restriction for walking into the store,
okay, that's what I was
probably for
wondering.
what you buy.
but tobacco is 21.
Right.
But you could be a local little store that has trinkets and stuff, and this is on the shelf that's, and I think that's the idea.
Right.
So,
Well, if you're wanting to move forward with this, I'll enter the motion that we would forward this to city council as we've discussed in our amendments to include a rolling 24 calendar, 24.
2 and 24.
Yeah, 2 and 24, keeping the language of shall in there, and not necessarily certain what other things we amended it with, but
I'll second.
that's my motion.
And you want it to take effect 30 days after passage?
Oh, yeah, we
Yeah,
need to notify
yeah,
them.
that was part of our discussion, too. I think we owe them a little bit of courtesy and
Absolutely.
letting them know.
Okay.
They have to rid themselves of that stock somehow, so they'll probably have a big sale.
Don't tell the coroner that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got a first, we got a second, well, we got a first by Tolly, second by Lewis, to go ahead and forward this to city council, and 2 violations in 24 months. Keep what was discussed, a shall in there. Any other questions, concerns? No? Okay, Tolly?
Aye.
Barron?
Aye.
Lewis?
Aye.
I myself's an aye. Motion passes. Thank you. The next one is outdoor donation box discussion, placement, maintenance, restriction, violations. We had this on here, I think we discussed it at length, where we settled it originally was going to be like 15, limit them to 15, and we ended up settling with 2 per ward, and the placement to be at the rear of the structure, unless that's not feasible. Then it would be acceptable on the side, but not in the front. So I believe in the last discussion we had, it was to direct, legal to draw it up and bring it forward at the city council, but she thought she'd bring it to us. A red line copy, correct?
Yes.
Just so we know, what was done. So you should have a copy of that. Because we didn't, once again, the penalties, we didn't get into that, so those are placed in there. No different really than most code violations, correct? For the most part? Maximum of 750,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
pretty much standard.
standard, and nothing got changed about that.
Okay,
The change is the fee from 100 to 250, that you can't have any one drop box within 1,500 feet of another drop box. So I think what they were doing is putting 2 together,
right,
and now because we're only having 14, it didn't make sense to put 2 together, in 7 locations. They're going to want to spread them out, so I put no one can be closer than 1,500 feet to another, which should take care of that. And then on the third page is just where they should be placed. Only 1 per parcel at any business. Now, this not to exceed 4 cubic yards, that was for 2 boxes. I have no idea spatially what the cubic yardage of a box like that is. And I don't know if that meant 4 each, but I don't know if we need to amend that, or if it matters, or take it out completely. I don't know. I think they just wanted to be a standard size.
well, a cubic yard, 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot, so, if you stacked it up, you wouldn't be able to have a big dumpster,
Most of them that I see, I'm just doing math in my head, would probably be a 2 cubic yard container,
So
roughly 3 by 3,
So do we want to
and
change?
they can only fill so high within them.
Basically, 2 side by side would be almost like the
Almost,
maximum,
yeah,
So do we want to change that to 2 cubic yards, because that would be 1 box then? We maybe don't want to say 4 cubic yards and have it the size of 2 boxes,
That's about what you would have.
though in a way, that would be better, because the stuff wouldn't spill out onto the sidewalks in between their emptying of them, but, so if the recommendation would be to do that, I'll try to change that to 2.
Okay.
The other thing the change in here, and I don't, the word criminal was in here, at the section 8-170. It said, it may result in criminal charges being filed pursuant to this chapter. I don't know of any criminal charges that are in the building ordinance, so I don't know why it said that. So I thought it was best to take that out. Just may result in charges being filed, meaning you get a ticket and you go to adjudication court.
Donation boxes.
I don't know how long this ordinance has been around, but it just isn't the way we would do it right now. For criminal charges to proceed, we would be going to circuit court.
Right. Okay. Appeal of decisions.
6 feet tall and 3 feet back.
I'm sorry?
2 cubic yard, that'd be 6 feet tall and 3 feet back. That's
Yeah.
big.
I'm looking at 3 by 3.
Right. Basically, it's one of those.
Yeah.
I mean, like, 3 foot. by
And they
3
stand
foot.
about 7
You know,
feet tall, but you can only use maybe
About a standard box.
of it inside, the way you dump it in. Conceivably, you could squeeze 3 cubic yards in there if you wanted to, but the point is getting it picked up before it overflows. and-
Right.
Well, and that's why this is here. I mean, if they were being picked up and maintained, this wouldn't even be on the,
This wouldn't even be.
wouldn't be discussed,
Absolutely.
so. Outside of that, I think it's just, pass it on to full city council. I mean, unless there's any discussion on it.
I'll make a motion that we move this on to city council with full recommendation, with the one change being in section 8169 E, that it be 2 cubic yards instead of 4 cubic yards.
Okay, get a first from Barron,
Second.
second by Lewis. Any discussion? Roll call, Tolly,
Aye.
Barron,
Aye.
Lewis.
Aye.
Myself's aye. Motion passes. Thank you. Under new business, we have discussion on temporary lease options on city-owned property for hydroponic, agricultural, and retail shops. I'm going to go ahead and defer to the city planner. Are you on? You're not.
Jenny.
Shane. There we go, you should be on.
Hello. Thank you, Alderman Marzak.
Oh, yes, you're on now.
Hi, everyone. So I have put together just a really quick presentation. It's probably a little wordy. That's what planners do, I think. That is just a discussion about the potential of 2 temporary uses in shipping containers. Also, a brief discussion about the temporary use ordinance, which is where I think this would go, because we also looked at just kind of assessing some of the issues that are in the temporary use ordinance while we're doing this. So if this moves forward, I would want to go ahead and wrap those into this ordinance update. I also think that if we decide not to move forward with this ordinance separately, that we should still address the temporary use section, so we'll talk about that in here. So this came to my office and also ECDA office. Alderman Barron was approached by I don't know if she's a resident. She's a resident? Yes, resident. Who actually runs an urban, like a hydroponic business out of a shipping container. She's outside the city right now. She's, I believe, where are you located?
The shipping container right now is in Martinton.
Martinton. So, but would like to move back here to the city. We don't really have any regulations for temporary uses for this type of thing. We don't currently have regulations in our code that allow for any types of businesses inside shipping containers either. In fact, the building code outright prohibits shipping container of any kind. And our zoning ordinance has a little bit in there that allows some things in trailers, but, so we were asked to kind of look at this and see how this would fit into our ordinances, and if we would be open to the idea of either urban agriculture or urban hydroponics inside of a shipping container, and/or retail, restaurant-type commercial uses in shipping containers. So just to start with, I have a few images here. You can see these containers, they come in for the urban hydroponics, the growing of crops, if you will, are inside these shipping containers, and they're relatively small, tight spaces. They can also have murals on them and look very nice and attractive. They're all contained within, which is really great, and there's quite a few companies, I believe, out there that are actually, you can buy them prepackaged, and these, like, you can buy the whole kit ready to go so that you can just start farming right away. And they have some pretty limited needs also, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then there's a picture down here. There's lots of images on the internet that you can look up if you wanted to Google it and kind of just check it out, but there's a lot of ideas about retail, restaurant, startup businesses inside shipping containers. They're very cool, very trendy. I think there's lots of communities all over the place that are trying to look at this as an option, especially to help businesses that are startup businesses. I think it really reduces overhead and can help facilitate economic growth. We did look at Lockport directly in this because they do have an ordinance that allows for cargo container. In fact, it's a permitted use there, and they're on village-owned property. So, and I believe that Tesca actually helped work on that ordinance, which is how it landed in our laps. So Lockport does have kind of a edgy vibe in their downtown. They're very progressive, and they do try to do kind of think outside the box and with ideas for economic development. So I know I've touched on a little bit of this already, but the hydroponic component of this, the growing of the crops inside the shipping containers, I think that overall, I thought this was a really fun fact, that you can produce 6 tons of produce in a year inside one of these containers, which is quite amazing, I think. I think it increases our access to local food. It also reduces overhead of gas and trucking for growers if they're offering those crops locally. And then for the grower, it's really great because it's a controlled growing environment, so they are not subject to, if we wanted to extend this beyond 6 months, say, they have a very controlled environment inside the shipping container, so they can produce consistent crops all the time. It's always guaranteed. So if they're producing, say, for restaurants, the restaurants can always bank on that crop being produced consistently and the quality always being in a controlled environment. I can touch on this here, I guess, but I do know that they consume a very little bit of water, which is pretty amazing. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was around 5 gallons.
Correct, yeah.
A month. It recirculates inside the system, and then it gets changed out on a monthly basis, but it's a really low volume of water that actually gets consumed. They need electrical connection, but otherwise don't need a whole lot of connections to the shipping container in order to operate. As far as pop-up retail and restaurants, obviously, if you can put these in places in the downtown, it can promote walkability, gives lots of really interesting and flexible dining and shopping options, creates a really unique experience, has extremely, what I think is a low overhead for a business startup, and has a lot of flexible spacing for, sizing for spaces. And then I believe both of these, we have a lot of property as a city that we own that's currently vacant, and would give some value to property that would otherwise be vacant and not providing value to our city. So in our current code, when we were looking at this and where we could fit this in, I just went to go look and see if we even allowed any of this. So we don't allow any retail, restaurant, agricultural uses of any kind inside of containers. In fact, in our temporary use code, which there is a copy of our current code, the temporary use in front of you, if you wanted to just look at it. Really, these first 3 bullet items at the top of this code section are the 3 that we allow inside any kind of container, and they're actually trailers. So like the first one on this, in our code section is the allowance of storage, so commercial, office facilities, I'm sorry. Office facilities inside either a building, a vehicle, or a trailer. Now, a trailer is like a shipping container. It's like a freight tray, but it's got wheels on it, so it's the thing that would hook up to a truck on the back. And then the second one in our current code that we allow is like temporary facilities during construction. So like if somebody's under construction, they can have a contractor office on site, or they can have an office for their, like if it's a residential development, they can have like if they were leasing, they could have a leasing option for temporary use during construction. And they could have it inside of a trailer. And then we also allow for storage on commercial and industrial properties, and that's allowed also in trailers. But specifically, a shipping container is different than a trailer. And so I think if we were going to add this, we would need to incorporate this somewhere in here, definitions of those things, and then I think there would need to be a separate section in the temporary use that addressed these pop-up type uses. The other thing is that I mentioned before that the building code outright prohibits anything inside shipping containers, so we would also need to address that ordinance if we were going to address this ordinance. And then I also did just kind of a sweep of our temporary use regulations and kind of compared it with some of our adjacent municipalities and the other types of things that they're regulating in the temporary use section. Our code currently, outside of those couple things I just mentioned, we also regulate emergency shelters. We allow those as a temporary use inside of a building. We also allow mobile storage units. Those are like pods. So you can get one of those pods that it actually has its own time frame in here, so it's a much shorter time frame. And then, and actually I think that might be it, what we regulate. Some of the other uses that other municipalities are regulating are like outdoor special events, seasonal sales for businesses, like on a sidewalk sale, or if somebody's having like an extra inventory sale, like say it's a furniture business and they have like a patio of like outdoor furniture, they might have a sale. We currently don't regulate any of those things in our code anywhere. Basically not. I don't know if I really haven't been here long enough to know if we have an issue or if we have businesses that want to do those kind of things and if we should be. But I'm open to what this committee's suggestions are with regard to that. And so this is what my thoughts were after looking at multiple ordinances from different communities on what they would regulate if they were allowing this type of pop-up type commercial activity. And it's the one thing that we talked about, and I talked with Alderman Barron about this, was that we would start this potentially just on our city-owned property. This would not be across the board. It would just be on property owned by the city, and that it would be subject to city council approval and also subject to a lease agreement, meaning that we would only allow this type of thing, like a pop-up retail or pop-up restaurant in a shipping container on one of our vacant properties or a property that already had like maybe parking on it currently. And that would have to come to the council for approval and blessing. I think one of the things that we see consistently across most municipalities that are regulating these is that there's some kind of art component on the outside of it, so it's not just like a blank shipping container, gray and rusted, and that it should likely be placed on a hard surface. In my research, the companies where you can buy these kind of prefab kits, I believe they can be placed on railroad ties and still meet manufacturer warranty type things. But I feel like my recommendation from the planning department would be that we put these on hard surfaces. So I think that we may get into some discussion with engineering about impervious surface, and it's going to lead into much more bigger discussions if we end up putting these in places where there's not currently impervious. So but that's up for your discussion by the committee as well. Foundation landscaping is something I've seen regulated. We also talked about this kind of early on. Dawn mentioned when I talked to her about this, is if this is really a temporary use, why would we be putting kind of permanent landscaping around it? And if that shipping container is to disappear, then that landscaping might look odd in the middle of a property. Also, if it's placed on an existing parking lot, you may not have a lot of ability to do that. So I don't know if it's on a case-by-case basis. You could always, as a city council, regulate that through the lease agreement if you felt like you wanted to have some added. I definitely think that we should have inspections by code. I don't know how frequently we would want to have those. Requiring parking, specifically if you're talking, I think the urban hydroponic type uses are less likely to need the parking, the intensive parking, but if you're going to put a restaurant into a shipping container, I definitely think we need to be thinking about what the parking situation is on the property and whether or not it can service that use so that we don't have an issue on the street. I do think that this leads back to me wanting hard surfaces and potentially putting this on existing parking lots, because I do think that adding new parking could be cost prohibitive, particularly for the retail, the commercial startup stuff. And then installing the new parking is also very permanent and could be extremely cost prohibitive with the site plan review process and the engine. I think all that would trip up for that. And then you would end up not having anybody really interested in it either. requiring compliance with the signage code, requiring compliance with any other general temporary use regulations. There was also discussion about whether or not bathrooms would be needed in these, and if they could be added, and dealing with security and lighting on the sites, because a lot of those sites are not going to have any of that. They're not going to have security or lighting on the site. But those are all things that I kind of, through conversation as well as found in other ordinances, were topics to regulate. And then I did put together, this is kind of what my recommendation would be also for looking at other codes and where I feel like our code does not currently regulate. Now, this is the topic that would apply, I think, to shipping containers if we go forward with allowing some of these pop-up uses, but it would also apply to these 3 bullet points here at the top that allow temporary use inside trailers, which we currently do not have any kind of, any like checklist for. So one of the things would be like adding regulations for where they can go on a property, being very clear that it's subject to certain kinds of setbacks, yards, can't be in easements, can't be in flood, those types of things, so that we know that there's a check, like if there's a permit that's got to get pulled, that these things have to be met. The adding regulations about modifying those, like whether or not the city wants to prohibit permanent connection to water, sewer, gas. If we are going to permanent or prohibit those things, do we not allow that connection, but still allow basic electric connection and potentially a basic like ventilation system, which I think I did see in some ordinances where they would prohibit like a connection to like a hard utility, you know, but they would allow like a generator on site or something like that for a summer month to allow the container to operate. Being very clear that there's no habitation allowed, no occupancy of this from a residential standpoint. Being very clear that there's no storage of hazardous or toxic materials. These are basic things that I think should be in. We allow temporary storage on commercial industrial properties all over the city. We have quite a bit of industrial property, a lot. We have a lot of places with a lot of trailers. And I just think it's in our best interest to regulate what can and can't go inside of these things, at least at the basic threshold of like non-toxic materials or hazardous. No signage for trailers or containers being used for storage, which I don't know if I don't think we currently allow that, but I don't think that we would want to allow signage on any trailers being used for storage. But I do think that the commercial pop-up stuff and obviously the wanting to have the murals on the hydroponic shipping containers would definitely be something that we would want to encourage. So trying to find a balance between those two things. And then obviously making sure that it's very clear there's conformance to building and fire codes. If we don't go through or require site plan approval, which I think could be very cost prohibitive, that at a minimum that the permit is very clear that it requires like some kind of zoning review or something so that it gets into the hands of either myself or engineering for at least a check for all the basics. And then update to timeframes. Dawn and I also were talking about this. There's a general label at the bottom of the temporary use section, I think it's at the end, that just says all temporary uses shall be valid for 12 months. And then I think, like the pods, it has a different time frame on it. So I think we need to be very clear that maybe these general regulations are right at the top, you know, that kind of outline how we want to regulate temporary uses in general, and that there's like maybe a blanket time frame, which is the 12 months, but then it says something like, or as otherwise specified below, or something, to make it very clear that there are other time frame limits on these other types of temporary uses, and then we can just address them on each one of these uses independently. And then, so I'm going to pause right there, actually. I don't know if we want, if there are any comments or discussion from the committee on their thoughts on this at all?
My only thoughts, I mean, if it's going to be a business, I don't know where it'd be any different as far as, you're talking about inspections, I mean, they come around to businesses once a year, and I think that'd be a pretty very straightforward, simple inspection, probably take them 5 minutes if that, but
Right.
my other thoughts, this can be very interesting if it's done right, but if it's not done right, then it's going to look like, a bunch of shipping containers, scattered throughout the town. But because of another thing that came up during planning a long time ago, I joined a group on container homes and ideas for containers. So there's some really neat uses out there, and I mean, some of them you can't even tell they're containers when they're done. But, as far as my thoughts on electricity, I would much rather have them have the opportunity to have an electrical panel in there, which isn't a whole heck of a lot of money, and have ComEd connect them on. I mean, if there's power there, they can run a line, and be done with that, as long as obviously nobody's living in there and you have the occupancy in that. But I don't know, thoughts?
Well, along those lines, I think, temporary hookups for food is not practical.
Right.
Because there's so many requirements from food preparation, cleaning, all that, the sewer, water, heating, cooling. I love the idea of containers. I mean, there's so many neat ideas out there everywhere. I just don't. I'm not so sold on the temporary use for a food vendor option here.
On that note, I think it would have to comply with the, local health department,
Right.
three-bay sink, all those rules. And something that comes to mind out by Big Lots, there was an ice cream by the Perry Farm there. This is probably going back, I don't know, it could be 10 years. But there was an ice cream,
Ice deli.
huh?
Ice deli.
There you go. So it was an ice cream shop, and it wasn't a container, but very similar, and they had temporary power to it, and they vented in that northeast corner there.
Yeah.
Don't know what happened to it, but I mean, it was there for a couple seasons, I believe.
I was there a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, it can be done, as far as, that type of thing.
I could be convinced otherwise. I'm just,
Right.
from the hydroponic standpoint, I mean, you can cart in the water for the little amount of water that's necessary to, do
Right.
that kind of thing. That's just one element, but yeah, I mean, that's simple.
I mean, if there
These
were,
these, by the way, are on a temporary basis, actually safer in respect to, I'm thinking of, springtime tornado weather, trailers fall over. Containers tend to be a little more stable because they're not perched up so high that you don't have that underneath carriage where, wind could pick up. That's just, they're just big blocks of steel that resist a lot of, so there's some real stability in these that you don't find in some of the other things that are allowed.
I just like to do a little research on, the only thing I knew about containers being used for like tiny homes and stuff
Oh, yeah.
like that. That's the only
Yeah.
knowledge I have of it, but I hadn't heard about the growing of food in stores, so yeah, I like to check into it. Especially with the building code, maybe, are we gonna discuss this at CDA and code?
So since there's not really like a definitive process for this, I can tell you that at a minimum, this has to go to a hearing at planning board, because this would be in the zoning code, and so it has to go to a hearing and then a council approval. Otherwise, I think it's really up to all of us to determine which committees we feel like we would want it to go to. I think Mike used to bring everything here, and would also typically have like a discussion topic at planning board before actually having a hearing. I always think it's better to have get closer to a draft before you get to a hearing at planning board. And then if we wanted to have it at ED, we certainly could put it on an agenda for a topic. Yeah? That's, I mean,
I think we should lease a couple committees or something, let the other aldermen, like it's only 4 of us here now,
yeah.
to get some more broader input on it.
I just wanted to offer, there's a comment about the landscaping. I think I'm kind of hesitant to the requiring permanent landscaping.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
That could, I mean,
if you want.
I do think it makes sense for this to be a conditional use. That could be part of a conditional use
Right.
discussion, I would think, if it makes sense at the particular spot it's going. I also like, at least as an initial step, it only being for publicly owned property as opposed to private property. I mean, it's kind of a pilot program in some respects, so.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. Maybe that changes later, but at least for this one, it does make sense.
Are these
That's-
city-owned properties?
Yeah, I had Zach
Highlighted?
pull it out in the GIS, just, I know there's not really labels on anything, but at least it gives you kind of an idea of where our city-owned properties are.
Dawn, do you have any comments, thoughts that you want to share?
General comments or just general comments?
No, general comments, I mean,
Yeah, a couple of years ago, my husband and I were out in Reno, and we came upon what was probably a quarter of a city block that was completely lined in containers that were all cut windows out of the, front half. So the backs were lining like this, and you walked in, and they had a couple kinds of games inside, and then they had 3 restaurants, a bar, and a place to sit and eat, all in containers open to the interior, and bathrooms in a separate container. So it was a completely self-contained entertainment spot. And I keep thinking of, the spot we have down at the river that's supposed to be a food court,
Right.
would really be an excellent, experiment, I suppose, to see if something like that would work, because it really was just something different, and you'd have 3 or 4 vendors in there doing it. But when we talk about whether we should allow windows and extra doors, my thought is yes, because if you don't, if they can only be like the hydroponic where you have one doorway, I mean, they're not of use for a lot of things if you don't have the ability to cut out some doors and windows. Retail, you don't want to sell out of the end, you want to sell out of the side, right? So, I mean, I love, like, that picture is amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, things like that would be great, but that is not a cheap way to use a container either.
No, it's not.
So you're looking at the costs involved of doing it without, you're making it nice without spending a ton of money for the vendors. But if you line up containers in a U and you paint all the outsides in murals, it's got to be better than an empty parking lot, which has been there now for, a year plus. And it's not that a food court's a bad idea, we still might get that off the ground, but, then you have, so then when you look at the permanency issue too, the landscaping thing, in something like that would make perfect sense to landscape, but I think you're no longer on a temporary use.
Right,
Because
right.
you really want that to stay. So, that's another thing to think about. Is this a temporary use? Is this where it should be? Or is it a use that on city property only you can actually have for a longer-term lease? Because if you're going to move it in, start a business, I think about the people who do the pizzas at the farmer's market, that just has lines running down the street, and they're at every place you go. If they had a container versus their little pull-around trailer, they could double what they do. And, I mean, things like that would be very, I think, very inviting to certain retailers or certain food trucks that would have a semi-permanent place to work where it's not so cramped, not so hard,
Yeah,
and still doesn't cost them a whole lot
yeah.
compared to that trailer they pull around.
Do we still own the Court Street and Hobby, that parking, lease be parked, it is a parking lot?
Where the hotel used to be?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be.
That reminds me of the spot down that you're talking about too.
So Jenny Childs is the person who brought the concept for the hydroponics, was here, does have, I know you put together some information about her particular project that she can share if
Yeah, please do. Feel free.
So on this handout, the first picture is my actual barn that I have, that's in Martinton.
Thank you.
It has a mural on it now, but I was gonna change it. See if I can-
Thank you.
Sure.
This is my first ordinance meeting ever. So my container is a prefabricated one, and it's from Freight Farms. It's fully automated.
If you could use your mic,
Oh,
please.
sorry.
Thanks.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so it does grow produce year-round. It's temperature controlled. There's no pesticides or anything that is environmentally not friendly. The water that is used can be just delivered, so no plumbing is required. The only requirement I need is electrical. And that's that. I currently have, in my business plan, I have 75% of the farm sold to restaurants, and I have saved 25% for local use. So depending on what you decide to do, if it's on city-owned land, if you want that 25% donated, if you want that 25% at the farmer's market, you know, whatever, I have that allocated. It does grow 2 acres worth of what a typical farmland would grow in 320 square feet, so it's pretty cool.
Can you repeat that? How big?
320 square feet,
And then how big?
2 acres.
It'd be a 2-acre farm.
I have the water, when I do change it out, if you wanted to have landscaping, I could do container garden on the outside of it and use that water to water those plants as well. There are some restaurants in Chicago that are shipping container restaurants that I worked at that had the container gardens on the outside too. As a way to landscape without being too permanent, so that's a solution for that. My farm actually does have a door on the side, so there's a separate entrance on this one. It's quiet. There's a split HVAC in it, but that's the only noise that it makes, so wouldn't be any louder than a traditional building. And it can be regulated as agriculture. So some problems, people don't know what to do with it because it's a shipping container, but it's movable. But we found that if it's, in other cities, they're allowed in like light industrial areas or things like that. So it depends on like, I think too, if it's, you know, has wrapped in a mural or not, if it's attractive, if you're just leaving it like a shipping container. There's some options. I have some pictures. There's one of like Good Life Farms. They have solar panels actually, and they've wrapped it with wood, so it doesn't really look like a shipping container is under there, so that's like a possibility. That is like expensive to do, so I wouldn't be doing that right away, but I'm open to allowing whatever kind of mural you would want on the side of it to be there. It doesn't make a difference to me what's on the outside.
How many of these are you of this type would you be
I
looking?
have one right now.
Okay.
And then it's currently, I don't have it hooked up or growing anything. It's on my grandpa's old farm. So I wanted to get it to the city first before I start connecting, you know, like having to do it multiple times. but I was just going to start with one, and then, and maybe like year two, if it goes how I want it to go and how I plan on it to go, then I would actually probably not buy from Freight Farms again. I would just make my own, because it is much more economical to do. These retail, I think Freight Farms' newest model is like a little over $200,000 to have it fully fitted or hydroponics. Mine is set to grow, 75% of it will be basil and edible flowers. A question I get asked a lot is about drugs. Marijuana does not grow in a vertical shipping container farm, so it will not be that ever. And then I have that 25% of space that's open.
Can you talk a little bit about the process and the time frame for you when you go to move the shipping container somewhere? Because I have gotten questions about that. I think that there's an idea that they're so big and there's no way you can get it off a property or whatever. But I think when you spoke with us, I was really surprised at how, like, kind of quickly that can happen.
Yeah, so I just moved it from Mokina to Martinton, and the picture on the front is like when it got dropped off, so that's like from the truck. Because it is a shipping container, it is very easy to move. I hired a trucking company, and they picked it up and moved it. It's actually like a U-shaped driveway in front of this with some trees and things that were in the way, and it was actually kind of cool to watch. I mean, I almost had a heart attack a little bit because I was a little nervous about it, but yeah, they can maneuver it very easily. And it was a lot cheaper to move than I thought it would be, so. I would prefer to have it in Kankakee. I am from Kankakee originally. I moved away for a little bit, but I just came back, and I think it would be like a cool thing for the community to see. And get going, and hopefully spark some interest in some other sustainable operations as well.
So I guess, I mean, there's a little difference between this and, like a vending out of it, or, food and stuff like that. So, I mean, is your idea to have this close to downtown to, vend out of it, like for the farmer's market?
Nothing will be sold on the site, no.
What's that?
Nothing will be sold from the site.
Really?
No,
Okay.
No. If somebody wanted to come in and take a tour of it, I could arrange that, but it's just for protection of the plants and everything like that. You don't want people coming in and out, so. It would
Because that's,
pretty
I'm
much just
just
be
trying to
me.
paint the picture, because I'm picturing like, let's just say you want to have yours down at the landing, area, or somewhere close to the farmer's market, so you can, sell, out of it, so.
It's not a retail operation. I mean, this is manufacturing. This-
Yeah, and that's what I mean, that's a little different, so.
Yeah. But, well, I'll say this, you are the newly hired off-site manager for the Kankakee Farmers Market. So you have connections with the farmers market so that there is a end retail spot that is local, and that's part of what you've been thinking as well, right?
Yes, especially because we desperately need more produce at the farmer's market, so.
Actually, I was talking to somebody today that we need more produce down there, vendors.
I'm working on, I've got 2 farms today signed up, so.
Okay. To me, this thought's going through my head. This is a little different than, the retail,
Right.
So, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm open to, obviously a pilot program, but, now, this just sitting down by, let's just say the landing, that wouldn't really, to me, that wouldn't be the ideal use. But a lot that's, I don't know, off to the side or something, it's sitting there and it's not hurting anything, but, optics, south of town, we had a bunch of trailers just sitting, on a piece of property, so, but I guess it just depends on what, what we're looking for, like Dawn was talking about, down by the landing, where they're actually vending out of them, I mean, I can definitely see that I can see this too, don't get me wrong, I just want to be clear that we're not just parking this down,
Wherever.
yeah,
May I?
yeah,
We
absolutely.
have a lot of city land that isn't prominently displayed.
Right, exactly.
If you start looking at light industrial versus, residential or downtown, and I think, people would be looking for different things.
Right,
For instance, hydroponic gardening, if you have to keep it closed to protect the crop, basically,
Right.
you're never going to have it be in a high-traffic area.
Right.
You want it to be probably in a low-traffic area where you can still access it and harvest. So I think we might be talking about kind of two different ways of using containers.
Right.
That, and I don't know if we're getting it too complicated. It's possible we're getting it too complicated. And Melissa and I have talked about that a little bit too, whether there's a simpler way to deal with this without going through the whole temporary use
right.
issue. So, you might be able to separate those out too.
Is there any First Amendment issue with allowing a mural on an like a hydroponic container, but not on storage? I saw that as one of the recommendations.
Limiting content, once again.
Maybe. You might be right about that.
Right.
Oh, we don't, on our, just storage units that have,
Well, that was a
Multiple.
point that was potentially offered.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this, because like how we have to regulate in the signage code typically, where we have to regulate by, like you really would typically regulate by a district and apply to all, like consistent application, and so because these are all, it would be kind of a similar type of use.
Yeah.
We would want to keep
City-owned
them the
property
same.
also.
Like, why can't I also have signage on my storage unit?
Yeah.
Like, I'm no different than that person over there, yeah,
I'm
I get it.
a big proponent of being able to have some sort of mural to make them visually attractive.
right, and these pictures on here, those aren't what I would call murals. That's advertising. Murals should be, and it's in the eye of the beholder, but pretty, attractive, or at least colorful and interesting, but not just signs that say, here's who we are. Now, I think incorporated in a mural, you may want to put who you are somewhere so people know what it is, especially if you're running a restaurant in it. But these aren't, what I'd consider a mural to be more like what's on the wall at Martinez, something like that. Because it needs to be colorful and attractive and attract people to it. But about your constitutional question, I do think that if it's on city-owned property, we can maybe make a different rule there too, based on that.
Could.
And also use, the other issue being use. Or category.
I do think there's a differentiation between, private property
Storage
and
isn't contained.
allowing it on city property, and then,
Isn't storage actually a building? Or are
Well,
we
in
talking about
in our ordinance, we allow like 3 different types of application of a temporary use in commercial industrial setting inside, currently it is allowed inside a trailer, which is like a shipping container, but it's like the back end of a semi-truck.
right.
Yeah. And so my concern with those is that allowing signage on buildings, on storage structures like that, I guess, can become extremely problematic. We may not ever get that down if it's not compliant. Like, it just becomes, I think, potentially an issue. Now, if somebody wanted to put something on a
Mural.
and it was attractive, I guess maybe we were open to discussion about it.
And I think our sign ordinance does already distinguish between signs and murals.
Yes, it does.
Murals are.
It does.
Are okay in most zones.
Yes.
It's how you view them too, so, what you consider art, I might consider,
Right.
a sign. We're really splitting hairs on that, but,
And some of this comes from, when doing the research, what you find in other ordinances where communities are regulating, what I'm seeing is that oftentimes signage is not allowed on, like, temporary use situations. Obviously, when we're talking about retail pop-up and commercial uses in these shipping containers, they're going to have marketing of some kind. So it's a
Right.
whole different ballgame. Yeah.
Well, for instance, we have a storage facility over in Meadowview, that if they could paint murals all along the actual containers that they have lining the streets, that would be an improvement,
Right.
Right.
right? Because those containers, as they sit temporarily, are not attractive. And that has been kind of an issue. It's like, why is this really unattractive business right here on the street? But, you know.
I will also say that my brain just went to, sometimes it does this with, I go down a rabbit hole, but I could imagine, right now, we don't currently restrict, like, the quantity of these on a property or where they can be located. So you could imagine maybe you're driving by I-57 and there's a property and it's own industrial, and now they've lined these all up on the side, and now they have banners on them that are allowed through signage code that now is a loophole for billboards, is pretty much what you've done. And they could be leasing them and we would have no way, I mean, it's just one thought in my head.
Well, being on, I mean, that it obviously would be a temporary, you know, let's call it a year lease, if nothing else, 6 months, a year, let's just say, let's use a year for simplicity. You know, obviously, they'd have to present what they're going to put on there, correct? I mean, and approve, subject to the approval, you know, of the lease, I mean.
Yeah.
But then we get into fine lines of, oh, so you don't want my, you know, my artwork, which is X, or, you know, Marzac. Well, is that art, or is that an advertisement? So, but those are fine lines that legal and planning can work out, but, I mean, as a consensus, I would say I'm open to, I like the potential of the retail, and, I mean, I don't, in the right locations, I don't see where this is harming anything, you know, so I'd be open to the idea. So what are you looking from us?
This has been such a great conversation, actually. I think it was all super constructive. I do want to ask one specific thing, which is, I know you mentioned that potentially this would be good regulated as a conditional use. So I'm curious what the rest of the committee thinks about that. I've had kind of conflicted thoughts about it. I feel like the biggest benefit of, the biggest benefit of that is that you would get the public hearing, which would give us public feedback on that, on a specific lot being requested.
Right.
Otherwise, I feel like the council is going to have plentiful opportunity to condition any of these through this pilot program on our own property. So I think that really it would just, for me, it's just whether or not we feel like a use like this on city-owned property needs to go to public hearing to incorporate any of those public comments. And then there's obviously a cost and a time implication with the conditional use.
I do want to say right now, just the farm right now is parked on grass. As you can see, it is on railroad ties, so that I could protect the grass underneath for when I go to move it. And it can also be trap rock, asphalt, sonotubes, or a concrete pad. So there's a lot of different options so that you're not ruining the actual lot.
Dig it deep enough, you can put it on gravel.
Are you really going to go there?
I've got a great big old lot that doesn't belong to the city on the west side. I'd love to have something sitting there that looked really nice.
Right.
Would you like to sign it over then?
Yeah, yeah.
So can I ask a question?
Feel free, I mean,
The
I'm,
railroad tie idea, is it like just a couple?
Yes, it's three. The front of the farm needs to be a little bit higher than the back, just for the water circulation. So I have 3 railroad ties. So it's just in the front. So the container itself needs 52 feet by 10 feet. The actual container is 9 by 40. On the back end is like the HVAC and stuff, so you need a little bit of extra room and room for the doors to open. But underneath the front, there's 2 ties stacked on top of each other right now, and then in the back, there's just 1.
I just think of that as leaving a little space under, something like that is a place for bad things to happen.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely do a concrete pad or anything like that too. And then there wouldn't be space, because you only need 2 inches
Okay.
of it. You could slope a concrete pad, so.
Also,
it does
in
weigh-
response to the conditional use permit, I think I said that because it seems like there might be reasons why we want to have the opportunity to put conditions on something, but if you're saying that can happen doing just the regular site review process,
Well, I think
That would make-
that what I was recommending in here is that this would be subject to a lease agreement with the city council, so it's going to come in front of the council anyways for approval, and we could, I mean, I think if we wanted to regulate, say, the mural and the artwork through this process, for that process, and landscaping on a case-by-case basis, I think it can be done through that.
that makes sense to me. I just thought, planning board, they do this regularly.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
This is where it'd be good to have permanent landscaping and so forth, so that's.
I mean, our fees are low. I think, I'm thinking about all the parts of this process, right? So applying for a zoning application isn't always easy for everyone, right? So for business startup, for simplification of the process, for potentially a temporary use type situation,
Right.
I just feel like we should be thinking about as simple of a process as possible with
Right.
us still having the ability to regulate that use. And so while our fees are relatively low, I think it's like only a few $100s, but I guess it depends on if it's on commercial. I think they're like maybe upwards of 3 to 6, depending on the size of property, for a conditional use permit. Plus, you're talking about public notification, which can be upwards of $500, just to get yourself to a hearing. They're not even giving any kind of okay that it's going to be fine, until they get through that process. So that's just something to think about, I think.
And if there's going to be at least 6 months, 1 year, there's an opportunity to review it that I'd be more comfortable with.
Correct, right.
I can't, there's no other conditional use permit for public property. I can't think of an instance where we've done
That
that.
we've done that? No.
Yeah.
I feel like when
Maybe that's not
the one that comes to mind right now is Adam Baumgartner's project with the lease agreement we had on that alley section. So I think that kind of gives us a precedent for how we've handled these types of things in the past. I mean, and that's all I have. I think the healthy discussion, and I guess, do you think it should go to economic development for discussion as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think I'd like to hear it again, yeah.
okay.
I think, what's that?
For Thursday's economic development?
I think the agenda went up already. But, I mean, to speak about that, I mean, Barbie has been involved in these discussions. She's had a lot of thoughts about, I think, more of the retail uses
Right.
that might be able to be put in as part, and especially as part of the food truck location. I mean, that's, Bill Yonka, I know, has been thinking about this as well, if that's an option, so
I mean,
I
it's
think they'll have some
paved.
thoughts.
It's paved, so
Yeah.
it's paved and there's grass.
Yeah.
I mean, it's waiting for something,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, like with hers, I think hers, it is two different, to me, it's two different things. And I think hers is to me, it should be very simple. I mean, you don't have people coming and going, retail. I mean, if the lot's available, I would say as long as, there's a review and there's a lot available, and it meets XYZ, to me, that should be a very simple thing. You start getting into these other ones,
Yeah.
I'd say there's a little bit more in-depth discussion, but to me, I would think she could find a spot next week and, get the ball rolling. I think hers is a little separate than
Then a lot of,
the retail.
right.
And I'm glad we kind of, defined that, but, well, we didn't define it, but we discussed it. What is your time frame? When would you like to have something placed?
I do have contracts with restaurants, so as soon as I can start filling those, the better. It takes 6 weeks from the time it's hooked up to my first harvest, so I was hoping by fall.
To me, that would be very doable. I was thinking,
Yeah.
springtime here.
I mean,
You currently have this hydroponic thing going.
it's not currently growing,
It's
no.
not, you're not currently, okay.
No,
gonna
when I
say-
moved it, it's unplugged and not, there's.
Okay,
there's
I got
nothing in
you.
it right now.
Hypothetically, if it were up and running, could you?
6 weeks.
Pick it up and move it and just set it down?
You can.
Yeah.
You can move those relatively easy with the
Yeah.
proper equipment, and I mean,
Yeah.
they're,
Yeah, not
Those that
much.
move those
Roll-offs.
things have the proper equipment to do that.
right. So I don't know. I mean, like I say, I see it as two different things, and.
I do too.
To me, I see yours being very, very easily, a yes or a no, and the other one's a lot more questioning. But that's between, let's put it legal and the city planner then. As a consensus, I mean, I think they both have merit, right?
Yeah.
Yes?
I concur.
Okay. So I guess you're going to bring it up at economic development at some point, the next committee, or do you want to leave it on here?
If we're not going to take action.
Yeah,
We can discuss it. But I don't know if you're,
You could bring, so you can bring up, like, you could bring up a new topic
yeah.
that's not on the agenda?
Well, but I mean, you're not taking action on it.
I think it can be talked about.
Discussion.
yeah, I mean, or we're not going to pass this ordinance.
No.
We
Right.
could do this next month.
You could do it in March, yeah. And then I probably will put it on the planning board's agenda in March as well, to have a kind of a simultaneous discussion, so we can get feedback there as well. And then I think maybe once it goes through those 3 entities, we could start drafting something based on all of the feedback, yes? And, which is probably, so does ED always happen after this one?
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, most of the time.
Economic development.
Oh,
Except if,
So we'd probably be back here in April
I'll leave it on.
with a draft, yeah, and that would be like kind of a target, if you will.
Sounds good.
But then we're still probably talking about maybe May before it would go to planning board for hearing. Because I don't really actually know the process here, very clear about I just watched what Mike used to do, which he used to come here for discussion for ordinance committee, but then it looked like he would follow up with planning board like once he had a draft. Is that correct? Do you guys think that sounds right? Just seems what the timeline seemed to line up that way.
he would go back to planning board if he thought if there was a substantive change.
Would he go to ordinance committee right before council?
Yes.
Okay, like it would come back out of planning board and come back here?
I believe so, and then we would make the recommendation.
And then it would go to council?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'll try to put something together, and then Jenny, I can let you know what kind of our target is with meetings.
Right.
How long does it take your product if you started tomorrow?
6 weeks for the first harvest, if I started tomorrow.
Relatively fast.
It has 88 panels in it, so it grows like vertically, and each panel has like 6 channels. And there's 5 rows, so you can plan it out. You can do the farm in multiple ways, where you can grow everything all at once and then just have one big harvest, or you can do weekly, which is what I plan on doing, just so that there's always something in the works. I have some numbers I could give you, just to give you an idea of.
No, I was just curious.
Okay.
If it was 6 months,
Oh, no, yeah, 6 weeks, so.
Yeah, that's impressive, so.
Can you do more vegetables instead of herbs if you choose to?
If I chose to, yes. There's some won't work, it depends, but yes, you can. Leafy greens are very easy to grow in it, so like kale, collard greens, arugula, salad mixes are really easy. You can grow turnips, carrots, radishes. They won't be shaped exactly like what you're used to at a store, because they're in the, like, if you see like that last picture, you can see like a picture of a tower. It has that media, and that's pressed together, so a root vegetable will be grown in that, so it'll be kind of like a different shape than you're used to, but, yeah.
Well, I appreciate you bringing this forward, and hopefully we can get you up and going quicker than expected. but that's not a promise. So with that, we'll leave it on to the agenda, and after planning, I guess we'll see what the other comments are. We have no need for executive session. Alderman questions and concerns? Nothing? We're setting the record there. And I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Lewis?
Second.
Okay, Tolly? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.
You have ETDA, all right? Dave? You have ETDA?